to GDP, debt as it relates to the size of the annual gross domestic product in the United States, is over 100%. And is projected to go up. If we everything stayed the same, except we just move ahead in time, this debt to GDP is going up, and it's not sustainable. So it's not sustainable now, given the trajectory of where GDP is going to be going and where government spending is going, because remember, we're adding to this now.
The foundation of the U.S. economy rests on three key principles: land, labor, and capital. However, despite these fundamentals, the nation grapples with a staggering debt exceeding $34 trillion and still rising. Steve Hanke, a former member of President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors and current professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University, offers insights into how fiscal policies have led to this situation and what Americans can anticipate for the economy's future. Comfort is often the worst enemy of the economy. From 1970 to 2010, the debt situation has been relatively under control. Nominal GDP far exceeded the national debt, which was well under the debt ceiling. However, things have clearly taken a turn for the worse. In 2011, Standard & Poor's downgraded the long-term credit rating of the U.S. federal government from AAA to AA+. We've seen the Congress suspend the debt ceiling 7 times since 2013. The debt-to-GDP ratio has been increasing at alarming rates, reaching levels of about 129% during the COVID-19 recession. There seems to be no sign of cooling when it comes to government expenditure, and the national debt has piled up to over $34 trillion. The CBO's long-term estimates from 2024 onward point the way to ever greater heights, with the debt projected to hit 166% of GDP by 2054. According to Steve Hanke, as each year's deficit adds to the debt relative to GDP, the situation grows increasingly precarious. So how can this be rectified? Hanke suggests that one option is to raise taxes directly, which would make the situation sustainable. However, he acknowledges that this approach is often unpopular among citizens. Over the past 12 months, the federal government has spent $2 trillion, equivalent to 7.2% of GDP, more than it has collected in taxes, once temporary factors are accounted for. The U.S. government has been consistently spending beyond its means, and unless significant changes are made, it will soon encounter unprecedented fiscal strain due to soaring interest payments. These payments have already doubled within a few years, escalating from 1.5% of GDP in 2021 to 3.1% in 2024. Now let's break down what this all means, of course, with Steve Hanke, who has examined government situations and highlighted that some governments default on their international debt. Before we continue, let's take a minute to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for more timely updates.
Some governments do default, obviously, on their international debt. That's usually what you see. If you see a default, it's some country like Argentina who has foreign debt, and the country is producing what? Pesos, but the foreign debt's denominated in dollars, and they have to be able to exchange whatever pesos they have for U.S. dollars so they can pay the debt off. Well, if they can't do that, then they default. So that's defaulting on a foreign debt. Usually it's very unusual to default on your domestic debt. So in that Argentine example, they can always produce enough pesos to pay off their peso debt. But of course, they would be inflating those pesos, so the purchasing power of the peso they'd be using to pay off the debt would be a lot less than when the debt was first incurred. So that's kind of the government thing. Foreign debt, you do have defaults on sovereign foreign debt for the reason I gave, and domestic debt, that's pretty uncommon. What about the U.S.? Let's kind of clear the decks and get into, well, where are we right now? Well, the debt to GDP, debt as it relates to the size of the annual gross domestic product in the United States, is over 100%. And is projected to go up. If we everything stayed the same, except we just move ahead in time, this debt to GDP is going up, 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 and it's not sustainable. So it's not sustainable now, given the trajectory of where GDP is going to be going and where government spending is going. Because remember, we're adding to this now. If we run a deficit every year, you're adding to the pile of debt relative to GDP that we have. So it's not sustainable. So how do you fix that? So one thing is that obviously you can raise taxes. That makes us sustainable. Now, how do you do that? Well, they can tax you and they can tax me, and we pay up every April, or actually on a quarterly basis if we're doing our estimates. Or they could impose an inflation tax. Now, the inflation tax is when you inflate the debt away. So you have two mechanisms to bring the debt relative to GDP down. One is increasing taxes from you and me, and directly or indirectly through an inflation tax. And the inflation tax, of course, is the value of what has to be paid back is a lot less than when it originally was incurred if you have inflation. There's always a lot of pressure on the central bank in a fiat currency country to what? Inflate the debt away. There's the politicians, they don't want to raise taxes directly on you and me because that's going to make us mad. No one likes that. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor or you're middle income. Forget it. No one likes to have their taxes increased. So that's a little bit of a constraint on raising the taxes directly. So they can do this without any vote. You and I, our representatives, no one has voted.
No public impact.
No public impact at all. The central bank, the Fed, and in this case, the Federal Reserve System, just starts pumping up the money supply, and we have inflation, and that inflation tax does have the effect of reducing this thing and getting you out of the bind and essentially making the whole thing sustainable. But
the latest estimates of overall pandemic excess savings remaining in the U.S. economy have turned negative, suggesting that American households fully spent their pandemic-era savings as of March 2024. The Fed acknowledged that recent progress on lowering inflation has stalled, and it will keep the federal funds rate where it is until it feels confident inflation is falling sustainably lower. The Fed funds rate directly drives savings account and CD rates, and the top high-yield savings account rate climbed to a record 5.55% 3 weeks ago. So, where should savings be invested? Hanke suggests considering various options, such as arranging different types of pensions to access returns during retirement. He emphasized that the ultimate principle is not to spend more than one can afford, which is a fundamental rule for ensuring financial security. Let's shift our focus to a video.
Waiting is not consuming today and saving and waiting for some future consumption. Now, that means, in simple terms, you save today, put the money in the bank or buy real estate or whatever, you loan the money out on a mortgage and wait for the payoff that comes later. And what's the price of that waiting? It's the interest rate. I mean, the flow of income, whether it's a wage, whether it's capital gain from selling stock, whether it's rent, whether it's interest you're getting at the bank or interest you're getting off bonds, that cash comes in, and of course you spend money on food, and if you're renting, you have to pay your rent, and so you just want to make certain that's my advice. Get things organized so that there always is a positive inflow coming in, because at some point you're going to stop working, so the wage part will go out. That'll be zero, and when that happens, well, the only thing you'll have coming in, if you own real estate and you're renting it, you'll have some rental income. If you have stock, you're going to have dividends, bonds, you're going to have interest payments and so forth. But you want to prepare for the time when your main source of income, let's say your wage, goes to zero. You're saving, so the question is, well, where do you put the savings? So you can arrange for various kinds of pensions. And when you retire and your main source of income, your wage, goes to zero, you can tap into the returns off of whatever you've invested in due to the fact that you had a positive cash flow and savings.
Yeah, good
I mean,
advice.
it's basically kind of simple, plain vanilla type thing. Once you start getting fancy and so forth, it's the only way you can do that is if I knew you exactly and what your situation was and what your
Right.
portfolio, then I can talk specifics. But beyond that, you just have to say very simple things and
Don't spend more than you can afford.
yeah, don't spend more than you can afford.
In 2008, U.S. public debt stood at 39% of GDP. Now, that number is hovering around 100%, buoyed by the combined fiscal pressures of the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic. The current fiscal year thus marks a turning point where the cost of debt servicing actually might exceed the entire defense budget of the United States. How has it come to this? The costs of wars, a global financial crisis and pandemic, unfunded tax cuts, and stimulus programs have all piled up. We value your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments. If you found this content valuable, please give it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to stay informed. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.